Muslims cannot continue to see the world in such bipolar terms as East and West or West and Islamic. Muslims have been part of the West for centuries, and the West has been part of Muslim countries for decades as well. So I think that this whole mentality of them and us is completely destructive to the Muslim way of thinking. And it continues to be fostered in Muslim communities to the detriment of Muslim societies themselves. Not only at a political level, but also at a social level as well, and an emotional level, where so many Muslim communities feel that they don't have a buy in society because society is Western and they're not. And in actual fact, Muslim societies up and down the world have bought most of the hardware of Western societies anyway. Why they're lacking is probably the software in terms of how do I live in Western societies as a Muslim, but as a fully fledged citizen of a Western country. And I don't see that there's a conflict there at all. I don't see that there's a clash there. In many cases, Muslims are far more free to practice their religion in Western societies than they are in Muslim countries. So unless we can really accept this and not continue to make political capital out of bipolarizing the world into Islam and the West, then I think we're going to make very little headway. I think this is that one of the biggest generalizations we make is put all Muslims into one pot. And I would say that perhaps 2/3 of the Muslims that live in the UK don't want to be part of any of these debates. They're very happy to be British and living in Western societies and living as Muslims and doing their profession, etc. But it's always the minority that shouts the loudest. And unfortunately, the political context in which we live has allowed this minority to have huge ammunition on its side to make its voice heard the most. And so everything is seen as a conspiracy against Islam. Muslims living in the West are being conspired against. That's not to say that there are people of all different backgrounds, ethnic communities, that may not face discrimination, that may not face prejudice. But I think prejudice and discrimination are in all of us. And Muslims are not free of prejudice and discrimination. In fact, we're some of the worst bigots that live in the West. We discriminate against our own people, we discriminate against different colours, we discriminate against different forms of Islam. And I think it needs a different level of thinking, slightly more maturity, rather than just saying that the white Western society that is extremely permissive is against the virtues and ethics of Islam. Nobody buys that anymore. Not even the Muslims, they don't buy that. And in order for us to really feel that we are contributing to a wider society, and in order to gain the respect of the wider society, which is not an alien society, which is a society we have chosen to make our home, we have to know how to engage in that society. And we still don't know. The large majority of Muslims don't know how to engage in that society. Not because they are perhaps critical, but they simply don't know what are the basic tools of engaging within that society. And I think as long as people continue to see themselves as this repressed community, that because of the political agendas is facing even more repression according to them, then this will continue. This problem and these two worlds that are being created, parallel structures, will continue. And in the end, it's not the West that will lose out. It's the Muslim communities themselves that are losing out.
You see, again, Islam, in the Holy Quran, there are repeated calls to the non-Muslim, especially the believer in other books, to emphasize the commonality as far as the belief in the Almighty, as far as the moral concepts and so on, and also as far as the respect for the family and for the elderly and so on. So if people adhere to that, I think they will feel closer to other people. And even if they enter into argument or into dialogue and so on, guidance is given. Let us have dialogue in best manner, and let us emphasize the commonality. And if there are differences, fine, we respect each other, and we should not press each other to change our attitude.
If you look at the situation confronting the Muslims today, of the 1.3 or 1.4 billion Muslims who inhabit the earth at this point in time, something like 450 million live as minorities in various parts of the world. Of course, the biggest minority is in India, but you also have minorities in Western Europe, in Eastern Europe, in North America. This is a reality. Now, how would Muslims respond to this environment? I would emphasize 2 points as far as the Muslim response is concerned. Number one, there is, I think, a wide area of activity in the public sphere that Muslims can participate in, together with non-Muslims, together with the non-Muslims who are the majority. What do I mean by this? I would like to see Muslims in Europe, for instance, taking an active part in issues such as the environment, militarization, fighting for human rights, perhaps issues related to concerns which are embodied in Islam. If alcoholism is a problem in parts of Europe, I think Muslims should be actively involved in campaigns against alcoholism or drug abuse. They can do all these things. In other words, they should be part of the public sphere. They should be working with non-Muslims in areas of this sort. Now, there may be certain things which are important to them, which the majority may not be sensitive to. For instance, Muslims may feel that if there is a community, they would want a mosque. And sometimes you would find local authorities are not forthcoming when it comes to building a mosque or providing other facilities of that sort. Now, if you live in a democracy, you should make your voice heard. And I find that in many parts of Europe, European governments and local authorities have accommodated the interests and aspirations of Muslims of this sort. If they want their children to be exempted from examinations in school during, say, Eid, it's something which local authorities are prepared to consider. In some instances, it may not be possible, but even then, I don't think this affects your faith as such. In other words, what I'm saying is that it's possible to live in environments of this sort, to contribute and to flourish in these environments.
There'll be lots of issues that Muslims will face if they decide to live in a non-Muslim country, in terms of the social structure, in terms of daily life, in terms of even how they may choose to practice their faith. But I think that there's a misconception that one cannot practice one's faith in a non-Muslim country. You can practice your faith in a non-Muslim country. And by and large, most European countries are extremely liberal in the way they allow Muslims to practice their faith. The real issue is a psychological one, that Muslims who migrate to the West, and second, third generation Muslims who've now made the West their home, do not see the West as a Darul Harb, do not see the West as a land of the enemy. Because if the Muslim continues to see the world in such bipolar ways, the land of Islam and the land of the enemy, then that mentality that somehow the people with whom you've integrated, the people with whom you live and eat and breathe and work, that they are not of you, that they are not with you. And I think that creates not only a psychological barrier, but a barrier against the whole cohesiveness of society. Because Muslims then feel that A, they have to be defensive about their faith, but also that somehow that they have to live separate from the rest of society. And you have to ask yourself, well, what am I doing in this society if I don't want to integrate, if I don't want to contribute, if I don't want to learn from the good that is in society? It's not just about preserving your faith and your culture, even if there are bad things in your faith and culture, and there are bad things. It's about understanding what is the good that can come out of my faith and my understanding and the challenges within my own faith, and what can I take from the wider society as well, which may have people of faith or people of no faith. So it's seeing that Islam is not some tiny portion or tiny aspect of a wider society, but how being a person of faith, whether you're a Muslim or a Christian or a Jew, how that can contribute, how your faith can contribute, but only with multiple voices, that your voice cannot be the dominant voice. It's one voice vis-a-vis lots of other voices. And I think that because of what's been happening in the last 4 or 5 years on the political agenda, unfortunately, a lot of Muslims have made a lot of political capital out of seeing themselves as the victim community, as a victimized community, the kind of siege mentality that has fermented and continues to ferment and grow, that somehow the wider world or the European world or the Western world is anti-Islam. And I think that is a huge destructive force that pervades so many Muslim communities, and which actually stops them from thinking about their long-term vision for Muslim society within the wider European society, but also continues to deflect from the issues that the communities themselves are facing, because so much political capital is just made out of the international agenda, that they're refusing to look at their internal problems. And I think unless we start raising some of the issues, even those voices that are marginalized, unless we start saying actually the issues are within the communities, these are intra-faith conflicts, not interfaith or intercultural conflicts, then I think very little is going to change.